and thank you for joining us for the Voice of the People podcast here on kxnet.com. I'm Nicholas Kwalik. Today, we are discussing the future of fossil fuels here in North Dakota and a couple other things. And joining me to discuss that is Lynn Helms, the director of North Dakota's Department of Mineral Resources. Thanks so much for being here.
Hey, you're welcome, Nicholas. Great to be with you.
Oh, our pleasure. You are retiring at the end of June. Before we get into the weeds here, Dr. Helms, what's your thought on that? How does it feel to be finishing up a career with the Department of Mineral Resources?
Well, it's been a pretty amazing career. As you stated, I started in July of 1998, and there was not a lot going on in oil and gas in North Dakota at that point in time. The Cedar Hills field had been drilled up. That was the first horizontal, all drilled horizontal field in the United States. And we were getting ready to try to unitize that for enhanced oil recovery. We only had a little over 3,000 producing wells in the state, and production was about 90,000 barrels a day. Of course, 1999, we saw oil prices collapse, and we went down to 0 drilling rigs in February of 1999, first time since 1950. So it was a pretty interesting time. A lot of work trying to make sure that the industry stayed together and stayed healthy for what we knew would be a good future. We had scientists that were working on the Bakken and were working with the USGS to talk about the potential resource in the Bakken. And wouldn't you know, in 2006, they drilled the first truly successful commercial well in the Bakken and Three Forks over at Parshall, North Dakota. And for about the first 3 years, it stayed over in that Parshall Stanley area. And then I recall one Christmas Eve standing on a porch in Williston, North Dakota, and I saw this enormous flare south of the city. It was the first stage fracked Middle Bakken well. And I looked at that and I turned to the man standing next to me and I said, this changes everything, because it overnight became a 16,000 square mile oil field. And as you know, in the years since then, which is about 15 years, North Dakota's production has risen to well over 1 million barrels a day, with about 19,000 wells producing. And it's changed the economy, it's changed the demographics, it's changed the political power structure of the state. And so it's been an amazing time. I was just reading an article this morning that the technology that was developed here has been exported to Argentina, and they're now setting oil production records in Argentina. So it changed the world in terms of how crude oil is produced and what we think about crude oil reserves.
I want to go back in time just a little bit, maybe further back in time if I can. What led you to a career in this line of work?
Well, I had worked in industry for 18 years, and industry was changing. This was the late 90s. Industry was changing a lot, and everything was being organized by as asset team management. So teams of geologists and engineers were assigned to each asset. The company I was working for had chosen to centralize all those asset team leaders in Houston, Texas, and to move them around. They called it global mobile, and they wanted asset team leaders to gain experience working around the world. I did a little bit of that, and then I found out that this job opportunity was opening up in North Dakota to be the director of the oil and gas division. And I love North Dakota. I had lived here for 18 years. I wanted to stay in North Dakota. And so I just could not pass up that job opportunity. And 26 years later, I am so glad that I chose to take that opportunity and to work with North Dakota's oil and gas industry and North Dakota's legislature and government to change the nature of the state.
So let's go back to that moment when you said this changes everything. I know it's difficult to speculate, but had it not been for the explosion, as a lot of people refer to it in the Bakken, How do you think that may have shaped North Dakota had that not happened?
Well, North Dakota, up until that point, virtually every single census from 1930 forward was an aging population and a declining population. And so what happened in 2009 resulted in a 2010 census, as you know, that showed growth. And then our 2020 census has shown that we've become the youngest state in the nation, and we have a rapidly growing population. So the median age of people living in North Dakota today is 35, just over 35. And it was in the late 50s prior to the oil boom. So North Dakota would be a very, very different place if it had not been for that technology explosion and the Bakken resource becoming a reality.
Tell me about what you recall from that time about the environmental concerns. Obviously, you're digging into the ground, and that can have its consequences as well. So, would it be fair to say that the risks or the rewards have outweighed the risks?
Yeah, Nicholas, I think they have, but wow, what a learning curve. So the typical oil field up until that time was vertically drilled, or as I said, Cedar Hill's the first horizontally drilled field. And the typical oil field up until that time used about 15% of the land surface for well sites and roads and tank batteries and that sort of thing. And so we had the opportunity to invent something brand new, which was energy corridors. And we could place those 4 miles apart and not use every road and every bit of surface in the state. And so we were able to shrink that footprint to about 1%. So about a tenfold decrease. And when you go out and drive through the Bakken oil field, you'll notice that I had the pleasure of taking all of the U.S. attorneys general on a tour a few years ago, and they were shocked. They were expecting an industrial landscape, and they were shocked that it was still an agricultural landscape with every so often a row of industrial development for the oil and gas. So what a great opportunity. But that was a lesson we had to learn. It wasn't until late 2010 that we figured out we needed to do that. The other thing I think that was a big surprise, well, two things. Uh, Produced water. We produce more water than we do crude oil. And getting that to a disposal and getting it properly disposed of, we had a lot of experience with produced water injection. We didn't have a lot of experience with large produced water gathering systems. And so we had some significant spills that are still in the process. They're very near the end of their recovery, but they're not quite done. And so we had to implement rules and a lot of oversight in the construction of produced water gathering systems. We've been able to transfer that knowledge to other states, and thankfully, I don't think we've seen the kind of produced water spills in other places that we saw, 2, 3, 4 times in North Dakota. But we learned how to build them properly and how to monitor them and how to construct well pads and that sort of thing so that if we did have a spill, it didn't get out into the farmland or get into streams. The other thing that took us by surprise was the amount of natural gas. And so by 2014, we were way behind in terms of natural gas infrastructure. And you remember the days of vast amounts of natural gas being flared across Western North Dakota. We did something very innovative. Governor Dalrymple got the industry folks together in a room and said, I need you to solve this. I'm going to give you a few months to come up with a plan. And if you're unable to do that, then we will have to regulate it. And so we worked with industry. We invented something called gas capture plans. Every well that was permitted had to have a plan for capturing its gas and getting it to market. And so shortly after we came up with that, New Mexico adopted it, Texas has adopted it, Wyoming. So it has spread nationwide. I think one other thing that we learned is orphaned wells. So when COVID came along, we suddenly realized that we had a tremendous number, hundreds of marginal wells that there was no money in the bank or in the operator's accounts to plug and reclaim those wells. They became orphans. We came up with an innovative idea to use CARES Act money, and we plugged about 380 wells and restored the locations using CARES Act money. The rest of the nation took a look at that and came up with a program through the IIJA called Regrow, and put about $5 billion into that to do the same thing nationwide. And so at this point in time, uh, we're just about a third of the way into that program, but there have literally been tens of thousands of orphan wells nationwide that have been plugged using a model that we invented here in North Dakota. So
course,
a lot of challenges, but North Dakotans have a can-do attitude and figure out a way to do it, and then we share that with the rest of the world.
should have waited an extra second because you transitioned so well. Of course, this machinery, a lot of it takes human hands to work. Obviously Texas and Oklahoma, they have it better as far as the weather goes. So how has the weather and the climate here played a part in getting people to come to North Dakota, and obviously keeping the machinery moving as much as you can within the not so pleasant seasons?
Yeah, so North Dakota has a major challenge. We're very seasonal in what we can do here in North Dakota. We have about 5 months out of the year when the weather cooperates with building infrastructure and doing large projects, as opposed to like New Mexico and Texas where they can do it year round. So it creates workforce challenges. People don't enjoy working in winter weather outdoors, and it creates a lot of infrastructure challenges. The workforce challenge, it has shown up 2 or 3 times during the Bakken boom, and initially it was solved because the nation, most of the U.S. was in recession, and so everybody was coming to North Dakota looking for work. The issue there was housing. Where were they going to live? And we solved that with temporary crew camps, and then followed it up with lots and lots of building of apartments and single family dwellings. But we've filled all that housing now, and we're back in the same situation of needing to move forward with more housing. Workforce wise, people would prefer to work in the nicer climate. And so it's always a challenge to get them to come to North Dakota, and that has made it difficult to add drilling rigs and frac crews. But we think we're at a good spot right now. Infrastructure wise also, we found out that you don't build produced water gathering systems after Halloween or prior to Mother's Day. If you do, then you're going to have issues with them. And so we focus on getting all the right of way and everything a year ahead, and then things really ramp up during that 5 month season when we can build infrastructure. We're now at the point where we've filled again all of our natural gas gathering infrastructure, and we need another several $billion of investment. Happy to announce that just recently we had another new gas plant announced that's going to be constructed south of Tioga, and so we're going to move forward and continue to invest billions and billions of dollars in natural gas infrastructure. Also saw the announcement that we're looking at a natural gas to liquids plant in Trenton, and that project's moving forward.
Well, and again, you're doing a good job transitioning to my questions, because not everybody gets a chance to talk to the director of the Department of Mineral Resources. Of course, one of the big topics that has been we've been talking about now for last, I don't know, 10, 20 years now, fossil fuels and their future. Of course, we want to be as environmentally responsible as possible. So I suspect there might be a couple of viewers watching this podcast thinking, well, can we survive without fossil fuels? Is it even a possibility in your estimation, do you think?
Well, that's a great question, Nicholas. And of course, North Dakota is blessed with abundant fossil fuel resources. We've got about an 800 year supply of lignite coal. And so we have worked really hard to come up with plans such as carbon sequestration to make it possible to continue to generate electricity using lignite coal. That generates thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of jobs in North Dakota. And so we have a plan to make it possible to use that fossil fuel and sequester the carbon. Not only do we have abundant fossil fuel resources, but we've got abundant geologic resources for storing carbon dioxide. So we can capture it and store it. We have the most abundant storage capacity in the nation, about 256 billion tons of storage capacity. So we're just beginning to scratch the surface. That's on the lignite coal side. On the oil and gas side, we estimate that the Bakken contains about 300 billion barrels of oil, and we've got the potential to produce maybe 10 or 20% of that, which means that we'll still be producing Bakken crude oil above 1 million barrels a day 4 generations from now. And so we're taking a long view of this. Now, does that match up with what the world thinks about fossil fuels? So I always watch what the International Energy Agency is saying about fossil fuels, and they talk a lot about the energy transition, and we are in an energy transition. We're seeing the growth in energy demand mostly being met by renewable sources. But when you dig into the work that the International Energy Agency is doing, they show us producing and consuming the same amount of liquid petroleum in 2050 as we are today. And so there are decades and decades of demand ahead of us as we transition. It's not going to be an overnight transition. It certainly is underway, and the growth in energy demand in much of the world is being met by wind and solar and renewable sources. But the base load that we need in order to support agriculture and transportation is going to continue to be met for at least 30, 40, 50 years by liquid petroleum. And we figured out a very clean way to produce it and deliver it to market.
And we're kind of coming up on the end here, Dr. Helms. But I just want to ask, in your experience and talking about what we just mentioned, what are maybe one or two misconceptions or that you've heard or have gotten concerns about that you'd like to clear up for our viewers as far as this whole transition, and maybe just some of the things that come out of the Mineral Resources Department?
Well, I think two really significant ones that I can think of, Nicholas. Number one, that we can leave fossil fuels in the ground. We have these abundant resources. They offer us the opportunity worldwide to live with modern technology. The automobiles we drive, even the electric vehicles, are made, much of them, out of plastic, which has to come from crude oil and natural gas. People don't realize that every car tire requires a half a barrel of crude oil in order to make a car tire. So we need fossil fuels. We need liquid petroleum for many, many decades. Our current agriculture system, using crude oil and the transportation that we have, which is largely dependent on crude oil, is capable of feeding about 10 billion people around the world. Without crude oil or liquid petroleum, it's only capable of feeding about 2.5 billion. So it's an absolute necessity going forward. That's one misconception, that we can just leave it in the ground. Now, we can always find better, cleaner ways to produce it and consume it, and we're really, really working on that. I think the other misconception is that we can put as much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere as we want, and there'll be no effects. You can look at the record from the ice cores and from the last century, and you can see that we're rapidly climbing in carbon dioxide. I don't believe we're in the danger zone yet at this point, but I've done some study, and the greenhouses, they use about 800 parts per million carbon dioxide. That's optimum for plant growth. We're at over 420. So we're approaching that. We're going to need to find a way to plateau that increase in carbon dioxide if we want optimum plant growth around the world. And we're very busy developing those technologies and those resources to make that thing happen. So two misconceptions. One, that we can produce unlimited amounts of carbon dioxide with no harm to the environment. Not true. The other, that we could just leave fossil fuels in the ground and continue to live as a modern society and a modern culture, and that's not possible either.
So how about a final thought as you wrap it up, as you're kind of getting ready to step down from being the guy in charge?
Well, I just so much appreciate the way North Dakota has accepted the Bakken boom, the lignite industry, the way North Dakota has an attitude of we will find a way to solve this issue, and we will show it to the world. I hope that the state government moving forward will continue with the same approach, which is constant innovation in the way that we regulate, and constant professional business attitude of attracting investment. We've got such a bright future with population growth and a young population and abundant natural resources. We're just beginning to figure out what we've got in terms of critical minerals and the potential for salt cavern storage. And the future looks super bright for those industries as well in North Dakota. So keep up the great work, maintain the good attitude, and we're going to be fine.
Okay. Well, Dr. Helms, I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to kind of talk about some of the things that you experienced, and as you said, heading out the door, and just letting people know what it's been like to work in this industry. I hope that between now and the next time I see you, we'll get to see one of your cool neckties for another interview. But like I said, best of luck, and thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for watching the Voice of the People podcast. We'll be back soon with more questions and answers affecting you, because remember, it's your voice that matters, the voice of the people.